This is the Battery Metals Roundtable, a deep dive into the crucial issues around supply and demand of the metals that will factor in most prominently to a greener future. So before we get things going, I might as well introduce our lovely set of panelists. At the far end of the table, we have Bourassa from Nemaska Lithium. He's the president and CEO of Nemaska Lithium. Next to him, we have Goad, who is the president and CEO of Fortune Minerals. Moving down the table, we have Rebecca Gordon, the head of technology metals and energy with CRU Consulting. And last but not least, we have the wonderful Lance Hooper, president and CEO of Cobalt Blockchain. To get things going, I think it's important to define a little bit what we mean exactly by battery metals and kind of how that term has evolved over the years, where we are now, and maybe even a quick look at what's on the horizon. So to kind of get that discussion going, Rebecca, I'm going to go to you with that question.
Yeah, happily. Hello, thank you very much for inviting me to come here today. It's a great honor. So within CRU Consulting, we have been covering technology metals probably since the 1980s, when the cobalt market first got very interesting. Most recently, we're using the term to cover the commodities that are going both into batteries that go into electric vehicles. Obviously, that's the main driver at the moment, but also the commodities that go into stationary storage. And I'm not sure whether that's the subject today, but it mustn't be forgotten that to enable a revolution of electric vehicles, you have to stabilize the electric grids. And to stabilize the electric grids, you need storage. So battery metals is actually quite a broad term. So what we include is the main commodities in electric vehicles. So they're under the big heading of lithium ion, but within that we have a variety of commodities that contribute different aspects to those batteries. So the Japanese technology, nickel, cobalt, aluminium and lithium, has been sold across to Tesla and is therefore quite well known and quite well adopted within the US. There's a nickel, cobalt, manganese and lithium technology that came out of Korea, and that's really the one that's been adopted through Europe and through Asia, excepting Japan. And then in China, we have a slightly different technology, the lithium iron phosphate technology, which obviously is on different commodities and doesn't take advantage of the very strong electrochemical properties that nickel and cobalt bring to the party in the other two chemistries. But it has its place, and in terms of the future for us, it offers a cheaper alternative for short-range vehicles, and it possibly underpins electric buses and applications such as that where you're not looking for acceleration. So in addition to the commodities I've mentioned, you're looking at graphite in the anodes. You're looking at a variety of other things that can be doped into the anode, so silicon balls, people talk about tin, and then an electrolyte, a mixture of chemicals that will probably evolve over time because the industry is looking to strengthen or increase the energy density of these cells to get the cost down, and that puts quite a lot of pressure on the electrolyte, which is the liquid inside the battery. So we're expecting quite an evolution away from the current hydrocarbon-based electrolytes towards perhaps safer water-based or solid electrolytes, which give a stronger safety elements to those cells as the voltage goes up. So very strong growth, quite a breadth of commodities actually, and quite a range of different products within those commodities that differ from what you expect. If you just hear nickel, it's not the products that are being invested in to make nickel for stainless, it's different products, and the same for cobalt. I'm sure Guy will talk about the problems with metal versus sulfate pricing, but it's creating issues in the market.
Right, and of course, like you said, there's this wide breadth of things that are actually covered. Yeah. Now we do have representatives from cobalt and lithium companies at the panel, so maybe we'll stay focused to those kind of areas. Now something that you mentioned early on there is that things like electric vehicles are really driving this market. Without that explosion, we wouldn't really have this panel here today. Now I know there's some debate about how explosive that growth is going to be in the future. So I know, Robin, I know you have a lot to say about that. So I'm going to throw it to you right now. Is the EV future as imminent as we think it is? And on top of that, are there other technologies coming down the line that you think are going to have an impact on cobalt and lithium as well?
Sure. So we've been studying this metal for about 25 years, obviously, we've been working on our project that long. And one thing is really the marketplace has come to the recognition over the last 24 months that we are entering into a transformation in automobile. It's an industrial revolution. If I came here a year ago, I'd be talking about penetration rates in the auto sector of about 2%. I would say that conservative estimates right now are 10% penetration by 2025 for electric automobiles over internal combustion engine-driven cars. Battery costs have declined over the last 5 years from $1,200 US per kilowatt hour to about $140 per kilowatt hour. That is achieving near cost parity with an internal combustion engine. An electric car is a simpler engine. It delivers more torque. It's a superior technology. It's cleaner. There's no doubt that this is happening. You can argue about penetration rates. If you look at the German car industry, BMW, Daimler, and Volkswagen are all projecting 25% penetration by 2025. I would argue that China is the world leader in electric transformation or automotive electrification. They are incentivizing customers to buy electric cars and also providing disincentive not only to buyers of internal combustion engine-driven cars, but also people who service that industry. So they're no longer providing subsidies for manufacturers that supply parts for internal combustion engine-driven cars. So there is a real initiative that's happening. We're also seeing governments announcing bans on internal combustion engines here in the UK, in France, Norway, Netherlands. Also, it's expected to happen shortly in China as well. So this is happening. You can argue whether how many cars will be electric by different periods of time, but it is happening, and it's going to be very interesting to see what transpires, which car companies are going to survive. We're seeing convergence of automotive manufacturers, automotive OEMs with technology companies like Google and Apple with huge balance sheets are getting into this market. And then there's also the integration between autonomous driving, shared driving. We're really going through an incredible transformation right now, and it's fun watching it and being part of the supply chain for what's happening.
It seems like once this technology gets going, in general, you really can't stop it. Is there any other tech that we can talk about that's maybe on the horizon that you think will play into lithium or cobalt and the demand for those commodities as well?
Is that direct me?
For you or for the panel in general. Guys, feel free to jump in if you have anything to add.
I'm happy to chat on that. That's we've all I can do is regurgitate what I hear from global experts, companies like LG, companies like Intel that are in the business, and it's clear from synthesizing all that information that the lithium-ion battery is going to be the technology standard for at least a decade, if not 2 decades. It takes an enormous amount of time not only to invent a new technology, but to commercialize it and to reduce your exposure to litigation. Obviously, you don't want fires to happen in batteries. The application that's stationary storage versus electric automobiles versus portable electronic devices all take advantage of different cathode chemistries. So, for example, if you want volumetric energy density you want a thin cell phone battery, you have to have LCO, lithium cobalt oxide, 60% cobalt by weight. Whereas if you want an automotive application, it's NCA and NMC. There, the drivers are charge life, being able to essentially have a long distance. Safety is a critical issue, whereas charge time is more of an issue for a small electronic device. So it's a little bit more complicated. There's not one cathode chemistry that's superior for every application. There are different cathode chemistries that are configured for the application.
I think one of the interesting things that's happening is because of the relative prices of the commodities, actually the nickel in those cells offers the strongest electropotential, but it's the least stable. So you're actually seeing some of these, you hear about 1 nickel to 1 cobalt to 1 manganese, and then 5 nickels to 3 cobalts to 2 manganese, etc., etc. But actually there's a lot of work going on to move towards the higher nickel, because of it does offer that slightly higher potential, and the cost of cobalt, as you're well aware, has gone up very dramatically. So it is interesting that the technology enables within those cathodes for people to blend the commodities through the cathode to get exactly the performance they want. So I agree that at the moment that on the horizon there's no completely new technology, but I see a continual evolution of people learning how to make those cells better and learning how to push the boundaries, because at 140 we agree there's cost parity in the US with an internal combustion engine with the current subsidies for an 8-year life, but elsewhere we're not quite there yet. So the global standard of about $100 per kilowatt hour is quite a stretch with the current technology.
And I want to bring Guy and Lance into the conversation as well, which is the explosion of lithium and cobalt-focused companies. Do you guys see any concern for market saturation in terms of these commodities coming up on the horizon? I'll go to Guy first.
Well, as far as lithium is concerned, I absolutely see no short-term balanced market. It takes everybody looks at this, or most of people look at this as a mining project. This is a chemical, highly specialized product. So we analyze this as a mining project. We look at tons, we put that in an Excel sheet, and we don't absolutely put no impact on the qualification process. So it takes a lot of time to qualify a new production facility and a new producer and its product. So it's easy to think that because there's new spodumene production coming online in Australia, that automatically 3 months later there will be additional tons of finished product. It does not work like this. So and it takes a lot more time. And you see that new technologies have to come, and new processes have to come online to be able to support that. So and people also don't make the difference between carbonate and hydroxide. And carbonate and hydroxide, technical grade, battery grade. Inside China, rest of the world. So most of the new growth in the supply has come in the last 6-7 years from the conversion of spodumene strictly in China. But just for your information, most of that material does not qualify for the rest of the world. So when you see new demand coming from the Volkswagen of this world, just to put that in perspective, 25% of electric vehicles sold in 2025 by Volkswagen, that's 2.5 million cars. 2.5 million cars needs roughly 115 to 120,000 tons of battery-grade hydroxide of a quality that does not exist in China. Currently, there's not 80,000 ton capacity around the world. So you have to wonder, well, I suppose if I was Volkswagen, I would wonder, where are you going to take that material? And if you look at the capacities, all of these OEM car manufacturers, they behave like a OEM car manufacturer. They want suppliers. They want to have diversity of suppliers, not to be at the mercy of one. But when you need 120,000 tons of hydroxide of good quality, and you want to have, let's say, 4 suppliers, it means that you need 30,000 tons per supplier. Well, the actual largest hydroxide production capacity in the world is 16,000 tons. The second largest is being built currently is 24,000 tons. We're building one currently that's going to be 33,000 tons. Of course, as a supplier, you don't want to rely on only one client. So how many suppliers do you think a Volkswagen of this world will need? So it's absolutely impossible that you get saturation of the market in the next 6-7 years. Well, I don't see it. We don't agree on that. But when you look at the details and you think and you realize that, yes, China is a big market. It's gonna take its own inside material. But the other players around the world, and I amaze people when I say, I met with a Chinese group lately and they said, I said, well, what do you bring to the table? Well, we're opening the Chinese market to you. He says, well, my business case, I don't sell 1 kilo in China. I sell in Japan, in Korea, in Europe, in North America. And there's more demand in these countries than what I can produce on my whole life. So you really, really, really need to dig into it and see the details and what's available and what's really coming online. And after that, how long it's going to take to qualify it? If people say, well, there's a lot of new production capacity being built currently in China, that's incorrect. But let's assume that it was. And they build very rapidly, and the money is no object. I don't agree on this. But anyway, at the end of the day, a new facility will need to be qualified. And qualification process, if you listen to BASF recently, they talk about 3 to 4 years. If you listen to somebody else, it will be a year to 2 years. But you count that in years. So 2 years to build a plant, 2 years to qualify it. Well, we're about 2025 when you think about everything that goes around it. So do we see a bubble? No. Do we see an oversupply? Personally, I don't.
Lance, do you have anything to add to
Yeah, I
that?
think just on the cobalt front, which is a domain that we know better than lithium, we're looking about 5 years out, which is most of the analysts that we look at who are predicting the future. There's certainly a supply deficit with cobalt. 65% of the world's cobalt comes out of the Congo, and of that, it's certainly a large component is industrial mines. An area that we work with and in is in the artisanal small-scale sector. And we're seeing probably in the next 3-4 years increased supply coming out of the Congo, where it's actually going to make up about 75% of world cobalt supply. But it's absolutely constrained. The technology is evolving. There's certainly an interest in finding batteries that either use less cobalt or no cobalt, but based on the battery chemistry, it's a critical element. We saw some research put out last week looking, even if the price of cobalt doubled, you're going to see that a Tesla Model 3 is only going to go up by 2% MSRP. So despite the fact that it's an expensive metal, it's a critical one. But yeah, I think ultimately it's in short supply. The world's trying to come up with that supply through new projects that are coming online. But absolutely, we've got a window here, short term, 4 or 5 years.
And I think what we're seeing with kind of some of this big picture discussion is that this future is very real. It's coming. And that you guys are all in a really important and fortunate position. And one of the things that I really like about this set of panelists is that you all have very unique and interesting projects. I'm going to stick with you for a minute, Lance. Your project is your business model. I've never really heard of anything quite like it. So I'm kind of wondering if you could just, for those who maybe don't know, break down what that business model is, and in particular, the traceability aspect of it, which kind of factors in a pretty big way to what you guys are doing.
Absolutely. So we've been involved with, I've been working with my father, Peter Hooper, who's a mining engineer. We've been involved with traditional exploration and development projects around the world, 2 million ounce gold discovery in the northeast of the Congo, 100 million pound uranium project in Peru that also has lithium in it. But yeah, the last 3.5 years I've been in the Congo specializing in sourcing conflict-free metals, which is tin, tantalum, tungsten, and really we're metal traders, metal concentrate traders. We, in the supply chain, we're the intermediary between artisanal mine sites and our off-taker, which is Traxys Europe. And ultimately, this is a massive business in Africa and South America. When you look at Congo alone, it employs about 2 million people directly. It's responsible for 100% of tin, tantalum, tungsten, diamonds, about 20% of copper, cobalt in that one country alone. And 20% of the cobalt market represents more than $1 billion industry. So we think it's an interesting model with our cobalt initiative here. We've vended in our private DRC subsidiary into this new TSX listed project called Cobalt Blockchain. And ultimately, we've been moving pretty quickly, but we're 2 months away from realizing our first container load of ethically sourced cobalt. And it's very different. Traditionally an exploration project lasts years. To put a mine in place takes even longer if you're lucky enough to find an economic deposit. So we're going to continue trading in tin, tantalum, tungsten. We're adding copper, cobalt to the mix by June. As I mentioned, we'll be ready to sell our first material. And beyond that, we're in the world of 3 Ts, tin, tantalum, tungsten. They've been considered conflict minerals because in the northeast of the Congo, That's historically where you've seen conflict, and it was actually U.S. legislation, the Dodd-Frank Act, that effectively told SEC issuers that they have to report annually. If they're using these elements in their products, they need to provide an annual report to make sure that they know where it came from and they know under which conditions it was produced. So out of that came the OECD due diligence guidance on responsible mineral supply chains. And that's ultimately resulted in, on the ground, each mine site, there's an annual audit done. There's ongoing monitoring, and it's really to ensure there are no kids working in these mines, there are no armed groups benefiting, there are no government actors imposing illegal taxes, and there's baseline workplace health and safety environmental practices. So the copper cobalt belt is in the south of the Congo, bordering the Congo-Zambian border, and historically there's been no conflict. So what we're doing at the moment in conjunction with our trading business is layering in traceability. It's really an attempt. The DRC has had a bad rap the last year and a half, mainly reports put out by Amnesty International looking at child labor in these mines. And we visited a number of these sites over the last 4 months. It's an exception, but there's a lot of negative publicity about cobalt coming out of artisanal sites in the Congo. And really it's on us to solve that problem. It's a very solvable problem. We're implementing a new system. It's going to involve international third-party actors, so there's validation. And ultimately, we're trying to certify this as ethically sourced material. Underlaying this due diligence protocol, we're going to be putting it on a blockchain. It's a fantastic use case for this new technology that allows, really, it's a distributed database, and that buys you better security, better immutability, more transparency. So it's a better mousetrap, and ultimately it's going to allow car manufacturers, electronic companies to have greater visibility into where their product comes from. Phase 2 is to actually look at monetizing that, monetizing good behavior and actually letting the market assign a value to that. It's of interest in the artisanal small-scale world, but we've certainly had early conversations with a large gold producer in Canada. Their argument is that they receive the same dollar per ounce of gold as a mine that doesn't operate at the highest international standards for workplace health and safety, environmental practices, community engagement, all of these things that they spend a tremendous amount of time and money on. There certainly should be some value to that. So that's coming, that's in the future. But ultimately, we're a metal trading business, but also we certainly see great appetite for mineral traceability above and beyond just African and small-scale mining.
Awesome. And I know, Robin, you also have a cobalt-based project. Could you speak a bit about what makes that unique? And then, as well, do you see, Lance is knee-deep in this traceability stuff. Do you see application for traceability outside of the Congo in battery metals in general?
Okay, so there's a couple of questions there.
Yeah.
So the first one is the market is growing at 200 to 300%. You can decide yourself whether it's 2 or 3 or 250%, but it's growing very quickly, and we're going to need all the cobalt that can be produced. We don't want to see significant disruption to the supply from the DRC. So. Because that's just going to create hyperinflation in the price, and that's going to probably damage the market. You're looking at automotive OEMs. They like stability. They want to see a price, and they want to make sure that they can get the material, or they're just going to promote additional substitution faster. Like Guy, our project is vertically integrated in Canada, so we can demonstrate supply chain transparency from ores right through to the production of value-added chemicals. We will produce a cobalt sulfate product. This has been a 25-year project and unfortunately, to develop a mine in most developed countries these days, it does take a minimum of 10 years, up to 20 years to develop. So to have a project that is effectively shovel-ready today is fortuitous. But being able to demonstrate supply chain transparency with a material that's not going to impact the brand of companies like Apple or LG or Samsung. These are very critical, and obviously a vertically integrated project in Canada can do that. So if you are a DRC producer, clearly you're going to have to demonstrate that that your material is not coming from an unethical source of supply, whether it be environmental degradation, child labor, or exploitation of workers, political issues, conflicts. Obviously, we don't have those issues in Canada. So that is certainly an opportunity for our company, and some people would argue that we may even get a premium for our product not having those issues as part of our supply chain.
Right. And then at the end of the table, Guy, your lithium project is, so many of these lithium projects, they're brine-based. You're a little bit different. Could you kind of give us an overview of, hard rock versus brine and what makes your project a little bit different?
Well, what makes our project different from any other hard rock project is the fact that we've decided early on to be vertically integrated. So it's disappearing, but there's still a myth that brines are by far more economic than hard rock projects. But it's a false debate. People were comparing integrated, cheapest Chilean brine producers with non-integrated, high-cost Chinese converters, depending on third parties to provide the raw material. But our feasibility study and what we've done up to now completely proves that you can easily compete with Argentina and Chile as far as the cost of production is concerned. So a vertically integrated project in Quebec in this case, or it could be anywhere else near the mine, could compete and have a good quality product that compares very well with any brine projects in the world. The interest also of our project specifically is that we are aiming principally to, or mainly to produce hydroxide. We realized very early on that hydroxide was to become the compound of choice for the new chemistry of the batteries, and that's a good choice. At the beginning, people were laughing at us because they thought that there was no market for hydroxide or big quantities of hydroxide, but nowadays everybody is changing his mind. February 2014 was a very, very important date for us because until that time, nobody was believing in our business case. But in February 2014, Elon Musk announced that he was building its own gigafactory. And suddenly people realized that its gigafactory for 500,000 cars only requires 28,000 tons of lithium hydroxide alone. That's the full production of our mine. So it changed the overall vision of any players. So now you see everybody, instead of talking carbonate, are talking hydroxide. But they are 5-6 years behind because they have not done any work on this. So that's one of the other advantages that we present with our project.
Excellent. And I think we have just a couple minutes left, so I want to open things up to the floor. If anyone has any questions for our wonderful panelists, feel free.
What I'm hearing, sorry, it's Mike White from IBK Capital. What I'm hearing is that cobalt supply is needed now, and new mines coming on will take some time. Different types of materials need to be qualified. Lance, you mentioned that you'll be trading in cobalt in the next couple of months. What type of impact will you have on the cobalt market, and what does that mean? What's the impact back to your corporation?
Yeah, it's a good question. So April 6th, we announced our initial supply agreement with one of the largest mining cooperatives in Lualaba province, which is the epicenter of large-scale, high-grade cobalt projects on the planet. So ultimately, it's a supply agreement. It sounds small, but it's 40,000 tons on an annual basis. The average grade will be about 3-4%. This is what artisanal miners sell to us. They produce it by hand, and ultimately that's going to be about 1,500 tons of cobalt, which is about 1% of the world market, and that's on our initial supply agreement. So we've had a nice run the last few months. We've got a $50 million market cap, but if you do the fundamental valuation on that one contract alone, really it's worth about $50 million in free-flowing cash on an annual basis. So that's part of our objective, is to grow our supply agreements, but also bring online. We've certainly staked some ground. We have about 50 square kilometers of highly prospective copper cobalt ground in the Congo, and we'll augment supply from the artisanal stream with mechanized production as well.
I think the really interesting thing in the cobalt market is not so much that we're actually short total material today, because with the new announcements from Glencore and the ramp up from RTR, the ERG asset in Congo, you're starting to see quite strong production of cobalt sulfate coming in for the next couple of years. What we actually have is a market which is priced off metal. So the metal market is quite separate, and the material that's going into the metal stream at the moment is quite constrained, because those are markets, we are not talking about it today, but cobalt's also used in superalloys, and the superalloy market is actually growing very, very strongly as well. And it's used in jet engines, and it's used in coal-fired power stations, it's used in a lot of very high-tech applications, which all the same green regulations that push you towards electric vehicles also push you towards cleaner jet engines, which consume the metal. So today, a lot of the price is supported by a shortage in metal, in our view. You've got cobalt sulfate coming in, but within a very short number of years, the fundamental lack of big projects does talk to shortages in cobalt sulfate. Not today, so metal's tight today. And I think bringing the artisanal material into the fore and actually starting to quantify, it doesn't add material as such. What it does is make that material accessible, because we actually, as the prices go up, artisanal material does come into the market. You can look at it every year, there is material, but having it appropriate and more people willing to consume that will loosen the market a little bit. But some of it's to do with the pricing. So with all the prices being quoted in cobalt off metal, it's quite hard to see that differential between metal and sulfate.
It'll also be very interesting to see actually how fast these new projects are going to be able to commission. Roan Tailings and Katanga are talking about a fairly aggressive ramp up, so it'd be interesting to see.
A lot of country risk.
Yeah.
Thank you for the question. I think, do we have one more? Do we have time for one more question?
Just one more.
Okay.
Hi, Linda Rachan. This is a question for Lance. How do you deal with the perception that all that comes from the DRC is negative in regards to corruption or child labor or conflicts? Because this can ultimately affect your supplier agreements and the trading activities that you are actively involved in.
Yeah, it's a great question, and really I think there are two choices you can make with the Congo. It's a country that we've grown to love over the last 12 years. It certainly has its challenges. But in terms of what we're doing now and the perception that all artisanal material is bad and it involves child labor, certainly not the case from our perspective. But there are two approaches. You can disengage, let it rot, blame the government, blame the local incumbent partners, or you can engage responsibly. There's a problem, there's a solution. Quite an easy solution in our view. But yeah, every country has political risk. There's certainly all kinds of ways to mitigate that. Most countries have corruption, including this one in Canada, the Charbonneau Commission. If you want to look at construction in Canada, every country has it. And there are two sides to the corruption coin. It takes someone who asks and someone who pays, and you don't need to participate in that realm if you don't want to. And it's a very slippery slope if you do. But yeah, the Congo is the size of Western Europe. It's a massive country. It's got 9 bordering countries, and it's regionally very different. There's still about 20,000 UN peacekeepers in the country, but they're up in the Kivus, up in the northeast of the country. If you come down to Katanga, Lualaba province, the infrastructure is drastically different. You've got paved roads, you've got power, you've got cell phones that work almost everywhere. And you don't see any UN peacekeepers there. So to paint the Congo with one brush, I think, is a mistake. But yeah, it's a workable country. And if you want evidence, look at the billions of dollars of direct foreign investment that have flown in over the past number of years. And we'll continue to do. This is a mineral-rich country. and it needs responsible partners that want to engage with communities, with the provincial government, with the federal government on a different level.
You know, it does seem like we could really talk about this all day, but unfortunately, we're out of time. I'd like to ask for a big round of applause for our wonderful panelists. Thank you very much, Lance, Rebecca, Robin, and Guy. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks.